how are we going to get into this?
I believe step one, intro Steve. So the pressure's on you.
Thanks for taking this time. We've got 10 minutes, going to talk through, your thoughts on GenAI, specifically, how you've seen it emerge over the last few years, what you think are the biggest opportunities for your business. I think to start off with, it'd be great just to hear a little bit more about you, your story. How did you become the CEO of Luckbox?
Thanks, Steve. Pleasure to be here. I've always been a gamer, geek, from ever reading Foundation series as a kid into numbers and the future and excitement there. So taking that into as a professional poker player and then into the gambling space, working for PokerStars and to Flutter. And I, in 2018, I was trying to get into AI. I read this fantastic book called Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom. And it made me it was like the crystallization of all the thoughts I knew about, oh my God, AI is the most important thing. And it's also the largest existential threat to humanity. And AGI will either unlock every bit of potential mankind ever needed or lead to Skynet and the Terminator scenario. And so I was like, what can I do to get involved and maximize the outcome that it's not Skynet? And I ended up being offered a role that was unfortunately super duper junior. And I ran away from the idea of being paid that little, even though it would have been Denise Sasavis would have been my second line manager. And instead I was torn between this entrepreneurial route, which ended up being Luckbox. I'd done an e-commerce startup in the past. Or to go kind of what I knew, iGaming, and take it forward at a big corporate. And I went the startup route because I was more excited to work with new technologies, new industries. It was esports. It had a Web3 crypto element to it. And I thought I'll have a higher chance of being able to use and put AI then into a route. And then we took that public after a few years. I joined Activision Blizzard King. Again, with the aim at Candy Crush to use that vast amounts of data from a quarter of a billion monthly active users to actually create more and more AI use cases. And then, of course, ChatGPT happened and GenAI and LLMs, and suddenly I would have called myself a genuine expert at AI up to that stage. And then suddenly everybody who was working full time in AI just infinitely outstripped that knowledge base, and now it's prevalent everywhere.
So I thought we'd start off just with, I called it a little icebreaker. I've come up with some images, some of which have been created by GenAI, some of which I've tried my best to find originally sourced images on the internet. And let's just test your knowledge. Are you good enough to be able to spot which is the AI image and which is the real one? So we'll start off with one of my favourite characters of all time, Gandalf. There's two pictures here. Two Gandalfs here are fake and one is real. Can you see through to the true wizard?
So this depends on how good you've done, So the B is not Gandalf. That's actually taken from a Dumbledore source as well. So I'll rule that one out as being real.
It's a good treat, though.
And that leaves me with the other two. I don't actually recall C being an image from any of the movies. So just my geekery means I would probably go from that one with the tree foreshadowing. And I think I am from the hand, whereas A does look a lot more, there's coherent detail. I can't see any hallucinations. So yeah, I'll go with A being the genuine
So
image.
your photographic memory of every single scene from Lord of the Rings has done you proud. Yes, A is the real one. B and C both Mid-Journey creations. But actually, it's got so much better, right? If we look at this compared to what you could have created 6 months ago, even. And I think what's really interesting here is that we've actually got Sir Ian McLennan as Gandalf, and not a strange interpretation of that. But it means that you get some of those imperfections of him and his face, which actually we're not used to seeing from Mid-Journey images. Quite often they're sort of the liposuction look, they're pixel perfect without any blemishes. I think that's probably what makes this a bit harder than if I'd used a generic model photograph, for example.
Absolutely. B is fantastic, by the way. The level of detail of the lichen, the foreground. I mean, it's a really high quality image. It reminds me of some of the kind of AI influencer agents that are out there now.
Second one. Now, I've done my research. I believe that Quentin Martin has a bit of a history with Magic the Gathering. One of these cards, and I've got no idea how common it is a real playable card in all competitions. The other one, I fabricated the name, the description, all of the scores, and the image using ChatGPT and DALL-E. Look on your face as you know exactly which one is the fake one straight away.
So when I saw Magic cards, I thought I'm probably just going to get this because back when I was playing Magic professionally, of the 10,000 odd cards that existed, I could tell you every line on every one. But I'm way out of touch now as a grown man with children and a full-time job. That said, and I don't know either of these cards, right? I'm actually ignorant with regards to my knowledge. I don't recognize the symbols, but like I had an answer in my head within the first millisecond as to which it was.
Go with your gut. Usually right.
So if A is the correct one, B is fake.
Oh, he's got it right. 2 from 2. That is correct. I can't tell you much more about these. A is definitely a real card from whatever it was, 2015. But yeah, B was completely fabricated. And given I wouldn't have known where to start in creating it, I was quite happy that ChatGPT could not only come up with the name, but also all of the description and all of the correct numbers for me to feed into the generator.
It's a great example of where GenAI can help close the creative gap from. So I use it all the time, for example, when I'm writing like a complex letter that I'm worried about and I need to get a professional tone, or a job description for a future role. So I'll dictate bullet points what I'm after, hit enter, and it will take me straight to the job description that might have taken me an hour to read to get and compile from various sources, and then I can drill down in and get there. So yeah, it's fantastic. I was helping a friend build a board game yesterday.
Right.
I helped design, and actually you can input the rules sheet he came up with into ChatGPT and say, make me play, and a few other AI, and you can say, play the game for me, make the game from the rule set, and it can code the basics under the hood. And so zero dev code and stuff. There's a lot of opportunities.
I think it's really interesting, especially when you start talking about, I mean, take that as an example. We're talking about potentially player engagement. How would you take that game? How would it relate to different audiences? And you could almost even start to use that as a design process. So instead of maybe some primary research that you might have done previously, you take the idea and then asking, a large language model, what would it mean for an 8-year-old to play this, for a 12-year-old to play this? How would this relate to, this sort of genre of person? Which is something that you could argue can absolutely speed up that customer research process, but does come with still some quite large risks around bias and around validity of the results.
Yeah, it reminds me always at the moment. The current GenAI reminds me of when Google became Google, when we had the first wave of search engines where I could Google better than my mum because I'd learned how to do the various prompting and use quotation marks and minus and how to very quickly sift the results you were getting and refine. And it seems to be very similar with regards to not just the prompts that you're using for LLMs, but also your ability to recognize the quality of the data that underpins it. So, for example, if I'm asking, so I live on the Isle of Man, if I'm asking it for data on the health service over here, that's not a very large data-rich environment. So it will either hallucinate or just come up blank a lot of the times. Whereas if I'm asking it to use your example, tell me how this game might be marketed to a 12-year-old today, and it can look and say 12-year-olds have this language, this demographic, these are the top ways of looking at it, and I can put together a marketing brief of how I would go after the various channels and et cetera, on that. And so I think a lot of it is very similar to the Google foo of
yeah, you're right.
X.
I probably I think we're of a similar era. Before Google, there was Ask Jeeves as well, which was an online search engine where it was actually asking questions more in natural language. And it's interesting how we all learned how to do that and then moved on to using Google. And some people got good at it and some people didn't. And it really did help refine those results. But I think you're right. I think I find it so interesting. I've run training courses in prompt engineering. We all, learn that phrase, our children will do jobs, where the titles don't currently exist. And I think that prompt engineering, along with maybe data engineering and only a couple of other things, are truly new job titles that we're now seeing out in the market that didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago. I think you do a quick trawl on LinkedIn now, you can find people, advertising prompt engineering jobs, and it's a real thing. And in my experience, it's incredible to see how some people are better at it than others, and they get far better results out of language models just through, exactly as you said, understanding how to do it and understanding some of the biases, some of the considerations, some of the constraints of these models.
I think there was a company I was advising recently. Their model was essentially, there are multiple demographics out there that will never get good at prompt writing in AI, mostly the older generations. And their business model was like, let's build a level of AI on top of ChatGPT, using ChatGPT ironically, to help write prompts automatically. And my advice eventually was, you're basically just trying to build either a better user interface for ChatGPT, or help ChatGPT understand prompt building better. And I was like, both of these things OpenAI is going to beat you at doing before your business takes off and you market it, et cetera, et cetera. But and I find that that's often the case with businesses that are trying to go into, I call it X plus AI, something plus AI. And it's like, well, I just don't think you can build a sustainable moat in many of them if what you're trying to do is just use basic GenAI as the core of your business concept. Unless you are training like agents, for example, like whether you're training, so Databricks, for example, have I can't remember the name of their AI, but they have an AI that is trained to be a business intelligence agent, and it's trained on all of their users, all of their data, and so it's very specific with regards to its training set and its function. And I think agents are a huge source of potential in various spaces. If you can have the data set to train one in the area that has before it becomes too general and the Siri or the AI agent from Her, the movie, if you recall that one, become omnipresent in the personal assistant, which I think will close that gap before.
And I think you're right. We saw a huge explosion of companies in the last 18 months that are they're the ChatGPT plus a little tiny bit, which is something that they hit the market by storm and were incredibly successful for a very short period of time until we realized that the little tiny bit that they were adding was so easily replicatable. And what we found is that there's many companies now that are spun up that are really standing on the shoulders of giants. They're using a lot of the information, a lot of the technology, and then adding just a sprinkling on top, which isn't adding any value. And by the time you get to that point of being so easily to replicate, then there is no future there. I think just go back to one of your previous points. I've been using Leonardo AI recently, which is an online image creation tool, and they do exactly that. So you type in a very basic prompt. I'd like a picture of Gandalf, and then it will elaborate out that prompt. So it then will start to specify, give me a picture of Gandalf using a style of a Canon 7D, darkly lit from behind, blah, blah, which is great. But actually what it does is it gives you then a starting point to then refine on top of. So instead of being just a transparent part of the process, as maybe you were describing it, it becomes a very visible part of the process, but then allows you just to think a bit more broadly about actually what you're asking for, and then be able to very specifically change that prompt to tweak it as you would like it from your very simple idea that you came up with in the first place. I found that quite useful.
I think you hit it on the head pretty well. I think the best thing that GenAI does right now is it improves our processes. So it takes things that were complicated and allows us to shortcut a lot of the menial processes. So for example, you're in your kitchen and you want to make pancakes for the kids, but you can't quite remember a pancake recipe, you just say, give me a pancake recipe. And it will say, 2 eggs, 300 mils of flour, and 100 mils of milk. And you're like, that was right. So that's like a Google, but might have gotten there faster. You say, no, I want a crepe. Can you give me a French crepe? And or can you make it so that it's reduced sugar? And so now in real time, it's pulling recipes from all over the internet or whether it's databases and adding to it. So you can tailor it in a way that you couldn't when you're reading a physical book, or you couldn't just by Googling. Google won't take multiple answers and piece them together for you and add value to those learnings in real time. And that's really where GenAI can thrive.
Yeah, I think that's definitely correct. And I think you touched on it before with the AI agent piece. I think we see massive value when it comes to automation there as well. And I think especially when companies are looking, it's been a tough year for a lot of companies, starting to think about cost savings, starting to think about productivity improvements. And I think biggest play that I'm seeing there is how you can agentize certain elements of people's roles in order to act more efficiently as a company, to be able to arguably free up elements of that role so people can work on higher value activities. I guess one of the most simple ideas or concepts that we see behind that is just the use of GenAI in everyday jobs. So I now use it as part of Microsoft Copilot for summarizing meeting notes, for taking actions, doing all of the things that I'm not particularly good at doing because I don't really like doing them, and allowing me to spend a bit more time doing other things that are more productive. Are you using it on a day-to-day basis? Do you think there's any tools that you're using more than others that are kind of helping you work more effectively, more efficiently?
It sounds like the lazy answer, but it's ChatGPT. And I think if only ChatGPT was an easily verbalizable word like Google has become. It's one of the few apps on my shortcut bar on both my phone and my desktop. And I now use it more than Google. So I use it as Google, and then I use it to refine and build on top. And I think the job description writing was an easier example. Sensitive email writing, like if I have to give a performance review or let somebody go, I might take all of my notes. I often use voice to text as well because it's much easier when you're on the go. And then say, can you highlight these points? Can you hit this degree of sensitivity? Can you deliver this hard message, but soften it so it doesn't come across? And bizarrely, I go to AI to become more human in how I communicate, and that might reflect more badly on me. But one is this complexity, and so I don't know if this is a relevant example, but I remember as a kid using Excel for the first time, and you were like, oh. And the first level was like when you get to these ridiculously complicated maths things that would take me infinity to do. And it was doing it like that. Obviously, Excel is very stupid. It's a linear program. But ChatGPT, it reminds me of the same. So I was contemplating moving country recently, and so I was saying, hey, for an income of X, please compare in this country versus this country what my net income would be after tax, and then what would it be as a family with this number of kids and this number of dependencies, and oh hey, what about buying a car? How does the cost of a car compare? Can you tabulate all of that? And stuff that would take me substantial research and I would build it in Excel because I'm a geek, and I build really cool formulas to do the tax, it's doing stuff in seconds and bring it together. And so I feel those are the examples. And if you're a developer, you can have it with code, and you can have it check your code, and you can have it create notes and commentary on your code so that it's actually more useful for other developers that come after you. And so that I think it just improves our processes. It either speeds them up, or it adds more value to them, or it just takes away jobs that we didn't really like doing that much and allows us to focus our time on the more value adds.
Did you start writing, I'm thinking of leaving the Isle of Man, and it interrupted you and said, you will be worse off?
I do enjoy when it adds, and this is where we are getting to the point where our personal assistants or personal agents will be there and will run our lives and know about us, because I love it when ChatGPT, I can't remember how it phrases it, but it says, added to long-term memory. Whether it's the name of my partner, the age of my kids, or whether so the common ChatGPT feedback is, if someone's used ChatGPT because they use the double hyphen, and no one uses a double hyphen in real life ever.
Yep.
But you can just say to ChatGPT, can you please never ever use the double hyphen?
Yep.
And remember it. I remember reading The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You had the Babel fish doing the auto translation. We're so close to real-time audio translations, it's unreal. But similarly, you can say to ChatGPT and others, please present all currencies to me in pounds, for example, if I'm British, and so you want an asterisk, a tooltip to tell you what currency it's from and what the real number is there. But that's just a little life hack that you can do that just allows you to assimilate data in an easier fashion.
I think it's interesting you mentioned before that maybe it can make you more personable and personal in your emails. I think I read some research a while ago, and it almost comes to your point about Excel, in that I think the research was talking about the response to patients reading emails or letters that had been written to them that had been created by ChatGPT instead of by a consultant or a surgeon. And yes, they're factually correct, all the information was in there, but actually what was found was that people related better to those letters because they were more personable and they shared more, I guess, sharing in the sentiment of what the patient might be feeling. And it really is just down to the fact that the AI had more time to write it, because a consultant probably spends 10 seconds dictating a message now that's then written up. But the AI has infinite amount of time to add the extra paragraph about, we know how this feels for you, this can be challenging, etc. So I think there is the opportunity there, just purely from the time perspective, in that you could argue that AI has infinite time to do this compared to the limited time of an individual.
But not just time, it also has access to how to talk about grief and psychological books, and it can pull from all of that expertise of human knowledge and layer it and wrap it together in a way that the doctor in their 10 seconds don't. And talking about time, I remember reading about the difference between wetware and hardware. So wetware being the speed at which our neurons can fire at, and the fact that our current computational power fires at approximately 10,000 times faster.
Yep.
And so when we were talking about artificial general intelligence, or AGI, actually you just need it to be exactly as intelligent as a human, because it would fire 10,000 times faster. And I think the stat was it would take an AGI I think it was 1 hour to do the research that the entire of MIT can do in 80 years, or some comparison like that. And so that speed is also a way to create an eeringly inhuman advantage.
Yes, yeah, which is the true worry about AGI, I think, in the fact that even once it gets to the level of human intelligence, if it ever does, it exponentially increase from there because of the time it has. Absolutely. Last question for me, I think. We've talked a lot about some of the positives now. We've talked about the benefits of using this in the companies, but also in day-to-day life. What do you think are the biggest challenges? What are the biggest concerns that companies should have at the moment when it comes to implementing AI and GenAI solutions?
I think when you're handling sensitive data, it might spew it out in ways you don't want it to come out. I mean, I think it was Apple was chastised recently for its AI news. And so I think at the moment, the risk of hallucination, the risk of data protection infringencies on data protection regulation or breaking regulations is too risky in a lot of things. So I was advising a fintech that did credit scoring, and initially we ruled out the use of AI. So the number one thing the business did was assess a business's credit rating in 5 minutes or 2 minutes, whatever it was. And that was using human-built algorithms. And I pitched using AI to do this, and we ended up no, because we can't unpack the black box and we can't prove that it's regulated. And eventually I said, no, how about this? We run it in parallel internally versus our human algorithms. And when the AI wins, which it will repeatedly, we use that as a way of creating a learning to reinforce the human algorithms. And we keep that going until we have faith in the AI model. And now we say, actually, we want this regulated, we want to use this, which is where we will end up. But it was a root process. So I think GenAI right now, it's the data biases. It's all about the data underneath of it. Like, is the data biased? Is the data enough? Is the LLM trained enough to not tell you that a cat is a dog, or all the famous hiccups that we've come across?
I think it's interesting because we're probably going full circle. I think initially, because the models were smaller, there was a bit more transparency around that, and as we've got to billions and trillions of parameters, it's become more opaque. And I think what we're now starting to see is that trend to go back to traceability of training data, so that there's now smaller language models that are more, for more niche use cases, but that have absolute traceability of where the data that's being used to train them has come from. I've got a final question, actually, because you just mentioned it. Do you think that we, in your example there of training the model internally and comparing it against the human counterparts, do we hold AI to higher standards than we would humans? So I give you an example. Self-driving cars. There's millions of car accidents every year around the world that kill people. And there's been a handful of self-driving car accidents that have unfortunately resulted in human death. Yet the question then stands, do we hold the AI as the self-driving car to a higher standard than what we would expect from a human in that case? And how does that then proliferate out across all the different use cases that we're talking about?
So I think we certainly currently do, and I think self-driving cars is a perfect example. The current level of self-driving cars is probably better than the average driver, and I think we would have fewer accidents if we rolled it all out now. I haven't double-checked the data to back up that claim, but I feel confident that we're close to it if we're not there already. But as you say, there's still the, oh my God, the car that drove into the tree or killed the granny or whatever it is. And I think I'll go off topic. I'll answer with a philosophical thing. You can bring me back if you want. So you have determinism, which is the philosophy that everything in the universe is predetermined. And there's hard determinism, which is completely predetermined. You can never escape it. And there's an essay where it looks in the hypothetical of what if hard determinism was completely proven to be correct, infallibly correct. We have no agency. If I punch you, I was always going to punch you. It wasn't my fault. How would we change society was the question posed. So if I punch you in the face, can I go to jail for GBH? Even though I was always going to do it and I had no control over my actions. And the conclusion it came to after many thought experiments was no. We will always believe that we have agency in how we interact and how we think about our understanding of consciousness and whatnot. And this diatribe, which I'm sure we'll probably edit out, is to come back to self-driving cars and the standards of AI is we don't trust them enough yet. It's a way of relinquishing control. And right now, you can have a 16-year-old who's just learned to drive, pass their test and drive, and we trust them more than we trust, a Tesla, even though the Tesla's definitely safe. And I think it's a matter of just how do we let it out the hood? How do we regulate and allow this out there in a way? We have a litigious, is that the right word? Not at all. We'll Google the word. I'll ask ChatGPT for the word later.
Insert word here.
Insert word here, meaning a very legalized society of lawsuit and litigation. And we're afraid if a company allows a driverless car out without the regulation to back it up, to say, actually, the manufacturer of the car has reached a certain threshold of okayness such that they're not responsible, or the driver, or whatever it is, we're not able to do it. And so regulation always slow follows.
Yep.
And so I think when it comes to AI, it's going to take us a while before the regulation gets in place so that we can take the safety rails off and allow the general improvements to kind of really let loose and then Skynet.
It's an interesting discussion. I think other people would argue the opposite, in that the regulation hasn't acted quickly enough in the recent improvements in AI. And I think many people argue that we should have learned from social media. We should have learned that regulation took 5, 6, 10 years to catch up with social media, and now's the time to get ahead. But I think from your position as a business leader, it's always looking at what the opportunity is there as well, and you're pushing the boundaries to understand what can be done and how can that be beneficial within the constraints of regulation that you're working within, I guess. So my son is 8 years old. Do you think that he's ever going to learn to drive a car, or will he be driven around by an autonomous robot in 10 years' time?
I would love to believe that the Jets will have the Jetsons flying cars already, but sadly, there are commercial incentives that all of the second-hand cars that exist that aren't AI compatible will still have value. And so I do genuinely believe that politics will keep that from progressing, even if the technology is in place to get there, which is quite a sad answer.
Okay, in which case we will leave this on our final sad answer, and I'll say thank you very much for your time. It's been really interesting. We'll have to think of another topic to cover in a future session.
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks for being here.